When the world's greatest boxer couldn't control his shaking hands, Princess Diana did something that broke every royal protocol and created a bond that would last forever. It was March 15th, 1993, at Kensington Palace, and Muhammad Ali's hands were trembling uncontrollably as he reached for the delicate china teacup. The Parkinson's disease that had been silently attacking his nervous system for 9 years was winning its cruel battle against the man who had once floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee. Subscribe for more untold royal stories and drop a comment about what you think Diana whispered to Ali that day. Diana watched from across the ornate sitting room as the three-time heavyweight champion of the world struggled with something as simple as lifting a cup to his lips. The sight hit her like a physical blow. Here was a man who had dominated the boxing ring for decades, who had stood up to the U.S. government over Vietnam, who had lit the Olympic torch in Atlanta just 3 years earlier, now reduced to fighting an opponent he could never defeat. But what happened next in that private room at Kensington Palace would create one of the most powerful friendships in modern history, inspire a legendary nickname, and plant the seeds for Diana's greatest humanitarian legacy. This wasn't just a meeting between two celebrities. This was the moment when two wounded souls found each other in the midst of their darkest battles. The meeting had been arranged through intermediaries. Ali was in London for a charity event supporting Parkinson's research, while Diana was navigating the most turbulent period of her life. Her marriage to Prince Charles was crumbling publicly. The media was documenting her every move with ruthless intensity, and she was desperately trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for her two young sons, William and Harry. Diana had specifically requested that their meeting be kept private, away from the cameras and the protocol officers who usually managed her every interaction. She wanted to meet the real Muhammad Ali, not the public figure. And Ali, despite his declining health, had agreed because he'd heard about Diana's work with AIDS patients and landmine victims. He respected courage, whether it was in the boxing ring or in the palaces of power. As Ali's hands continued to shake, something extraordinary happened. Diana, forgetting every rule of royal etiquette she'd ever been taught, stood up from her chair and walked over to where Ali was sitting. Without a word, she gently placed her hands over his, steadying the teacup and allowing him to take a sip. But what Diana did next would change both their lives forever. The room fell completely silent. Ali's entourage, Diana's staff, everyone present understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. No one touches royalty without permission. No one breaks protocol in the presence of the Princess of Wales. But Diana wasn't thinking about rules or etiquette. She was simply responding to another human being in need. "Your Highness," Ali whispered, his voice already affected by the disease but still carrying traces of that famous charisma. "You don't have to." "Diana," she interrupted softly, still holding his hand steady. "Just Diana. And yes, I do have to. We all have to help each other, don't we?" Ali looked up into her eyes, and for the first time since his diagnosis, he didn't see pity. He didn't see the uncomfortable sympathy that had become so familiar in people's faces when they looked at him. Instead, he saw genuine understanding, the kind that only comes from someone who knows what it means to fight a battle that the world is watching but doesn't truly comprehend. "You know something about fighting battles that people don't understand, don't you?" Ali said, his speech slower now, but his insight as sharp as ever. Diana's composure cracked just slightly. This was 1993, the year her separation from Charles would become official. The year the War of the Waleses would dominate headlines around the world. Every detail of her failing marriage was being dissected by the press. Every public appearance scrutinized for signs of distress or strength. "I suppose I do," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. That simple acknowledgement opened something between them. Two people who had lived their entire adult lives in the spotlight, who had been reduced to public symbols rather than private individuals, suddenly found themselves in a space where they could just be human beings, struggling with circumstances beyond their control. Ali nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without the need for explanation. "The hardest fights aren't always in the ring," he said. "No," Diana agreed, still steadying his hands. "They're not." That's when Ali whispered something that made Diana's eyes fill with tears. "You fight for people who can't fight for themselves," Ali said, his voice gaining strength from some deep reserve of conviction. "I've been watching you, Diana. The way you hold those AIDS babies when everyone else is afraid to touch them. The way you walk through those minefields when everyone else runs away. That's not just charity work. That's championship-level courage. The tears Diana had been holding back finally spilled over. No one had ever compared her humanitarian work to championship fighting before. The royal family often treated her charity work as elaborate photo opportunities, necessary public relations exercises that came with her position. The media focused on her fashion choices or her apparent emotional state, rather than the causes she championed. But Allie saw something different. "I don't feel brave," Diana confessed, her royal training abandoning her completely in this moment of authentic connection. "I feel lost most of the time, like I'm fighting in the dark against opponents I can't see." Allie understood. He'd spent years fighting opponents everyone could see, Fraser, Foreman, Norton. But now he was battling an invisible enemy that was slowly stealing his voice, his mobility, his very essence. "The strongest fighters," he said slowly, "are the ones who keep getting up even when they're scared." Diana released his hands and sat back in her chair, but the emotional barrier between them had completely dissolved. "Charles thinks my charity work is just attention-seeking," she said, the words tumbling out like a confession. "He says I'm too emotional, too involved, that I make it about myself instead of the causes." "Maybe that's your strength," Allie replied. "Maybe these people need someone who makes it personal, who cries with them instead of just writing checks from a distance." For the next hour, they talked about everything and nothing. Allie told her about his early career, about the fear he'd felt before big fights, about how he'd learned to turn that fear into fuel. Diana shared stories about her children, about her struggles with the press, about the isolation that came with being constantly watched but rarely truly seen. "The loneliness is the worst part," Diana admitted. "You can be surrounded by hundreds of people and still feel completely alone." Allie nodded knowingly. "Fame is the loneliest thing in the world," he said. "Everyone wants to be near you, but nobody wants to know you." They discovered they shared an unexpected sense of humor, both having learned to use laughter as armor against the pressures of public life. Allie told stories about his famous trash talk, explaining how much of it was just a way to hide his nervousness. Diana laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. But the most emotional moment was still coming. Just as their conversation was reaching its deepest point, there was a gentle knock on the door. Diana had made a spontaneous decision that morning, one that her security team had initially resisted. She'd asked if her sons could briefly meet their famous visitor. 10-year-old Prince William entered first, followed by 8-year-old Prince Harry. Both boys had been briefed about Ali's condition, but seeing the legendary boxer in person was still overwhelming. "Boys," Diana said, her voice warm with maternal pride, "I'd like you to meet a very special friend. This is Muhammad Ali." William, already showing signs of the diplomatic skills that would serve him well in his future role, approached first and extended his hand formally. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Ali," he said. Ali's face lit up with genuine joy. Despite his condition, children always brought out his playful side. "The honor's mine, Prince William," he said, shaking the boy's hand. "Your mother tells me you're quite the athlete yourself." Harry, less constrained by protocol, bounced forward eagerly. "Are you really the greatest boxer ever?" he asked with the directness only children possess. Ali laughed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his damaged vocal cords. "Well," he said with a wink toward Diana, "I used to say I was the greatest, but I think your mother might be giving me some serious competition in that department." Diana blushed, but she was clearly delighted by the interaction. Watching her children connect with Ali was giving her something she hadn't experienced in months, pure, uncomplicated joy. "Can you show us some boxing moves?" Harry asked excitedly. Ali looked at Diana for permission, then slowly stood up. His movements were stiff and uncertain, but he demonstrated his famous shuffle, his hands moving in slow-motion versions of the lightning-fast combinations that had made him legendary. "Float like a butterfly," he said, his voice stronger now in the presence of the children's enthusiasm. "Sting like a bee," the boys shouted in unison, having heard the famous phrase countless times. William, more observant than his years might suggest, noticed Ali's struggle with coordination. "Does it hurt?" he asked gently. Ali sat back down and looked seriously at the young prince. Sometimes, he admitted. But you know what? The love I get from people like your family, like your mother, it makes the hurt feel smaller. Diana watched this exchange with growing emotion. Her children were learning something invaluable about strength, about vulnerability, about how to treat people with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. That's when Ali made a promise that would haunt Diana for years. As the afternoon light began to fade in the Kensington Palace sitting room, Ali turned to Diana with unusual formality. "Princess," he said, his voice carrying the weight of ceremony, "I want to give you something." Diana looked puzzled. "Muhammad, you've already given me so much. This conversation, meeting my boys—" "No," Ali interrupted, raising his trembling hand for emphasis. "I want to give you a title, a championship title." He stood up slowly, using all his remaining strength to project the dignity that had made him one of the most compelling figures of the 20th century. "Diana, Princess of Wales, I hereby declare you the champion of hearts." The room went completely silent. Even Ali's entourage, accustomed to his spontaneous gestures, was taken aback by the solemnity of the moment. "You fight for people who can't fight for themselves," Ali continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "You go into the ring every day against prejudice, against ignorance, against indifference. You take hits from the press, from the establishment, from people who don't understand what you're trying to do. But you keep fighting. That makes you a champion." Diana was openly crying now, but these were different tears than the ones she'd shed earlier. These were tears of recognition, of finally being seen and valued for the work that mattered most to her. "Champion of hearts," she repeated softly, as if testing how the title felt. "That's right," Ali confirmed. "And champions have responsibilities. They have to keep fighting, even when they're tired, even when they're hurt, even when everyone else has given up hope." William and Harry watched their mother receive this unofficial but deeply meaningful title from one of the most famous men in the world. Years later, William would say that watching Ali honor their mother that day taught him more about real leadership than any formal protocol lesson ever could. Ali sat back down, the effort of the ceremony having drained him, but his eyes were bright with satisfaction. "The world needs its champion of hearts," he said to Diana. "Promise me you won't stop fighting for the people who need you." "I promise," Diana said, and in that moment she meant it with every fiber of her being. They spent the next few minutes talking about specific charitable projects. Ali shared insights from his own humanitarian work, particularly his efforts in developing countries and his advocacy for Parkinson's research. Diana told him about her upcoming trip to Angola to bring attention to the landmine crisis. "That's dangerous work," Ali noted with concern. "So is boxing," Diana replied with a smile that carried new confidence. What Ali said next about Diana's future sent chills down her spine. As their remarkable afternoon drew to a close, Ali's demeanor shifted slightly. The playfulness that had emerged during his time with the children gave way to something more serious, almost mystical. "Diana," he said, reaching out to take her hands one final time, "I need to tell you something important." She leaned forward, sensing the gravity in his tone. "Champions don't die," he said slowly, each word deliberate and weighted. "They become legends. But legends have to be careful. The brighter you shine, the bigger target you become." Diana felt a chill run through her. "What do you mean?" Ali's eyes, still sharp despite the disease ravaging his body, looked directly into hers. "You're going to face your biggest fight soon, bigger than anything you faced so far, and you're going to have to choose between being safe and being true to who you are." "I don't understand," Diana said, though part of her feared that she did. "The world needs its champion of hearts," Ali repeated. "But champions sometimes pay a price for their courage." The room felt charged with an energy that had nothing to do with celebrity or royal protocol. This felt like something deeper, more ancient, a warrior passing wisdom to another warrior. "Promise me," Ali said urgently, "that whatever happens, you'll remember that the fight was worth it, that the people you helped, the love you spread, the barriers you broke down, all of it mattered." Diana nodded, though she didn't fully comprehend why this conversation felt like both a blessing and a warning. "I promise," she whispered. Ali smiled then, the intensity leaving his face. Good. Now, champion of hearts, it's time for this old fighter to head back to his corner. They said their goodbyes with genuine warmth, Ali promising to stay in touch, Diana inviting him to visit again whenever he was in London. The children hugged him carefully, understanding instinctively that they were saying goodbye to someone extraordinary. 4 years later, when the news broke about Diana's death in a Paris tunnel, Muhammad Ali would remember that afternoon at Kensington Palace and weep for the champion of hearts who had kept her promise to fight until the very end. After Diana's death on August 31st, 1997, Ali released a statement that surprised many with its personal tone. Diana was a true champion, not because she wore a crown, but because she gave her heart to those who needed it most. She kept fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves until her last day. The world has lost its champion of hearts. Years later, when Ali's own condition had worsened significantly, he would still brighten when people mentioned Diana. His wife, Lonnie, said he kept a photo from that 1993 meeting on his desk at their Michigan home. In the picture, Diana is steadying Ali's hands while William and Harry look on with wonder. He used to say that Diana taught him something that day, Lonnie revealed. She showed him that true strength isn't about what you can do when you're at your best. It's about how much love you can give when you're struggling with your own battles. The Champion of Hearts title that Ali bestowed upon Diana became prophetic in ways none of them could have imagined. After her death, it became one of the most frequently used descriptions of her legacy. The phrase appeared on memorial plaques, in tribute speeches, and in the hearts of millions who had been touched by her humanitarian work. Prince William, now a father himself, has often spoken about the lessons he learned from watching his mother with Ali that day. She taught me that real royalty isn't about titles or protocol, he said in a 2017 interview marking the 20th anniversary of her death. It's about using whatever platform you have to lift up others. Muhammad Ali saw that in her, and he gave her a title that mattered more than any she was born with. Muhammad Ali died on June 3, 2016, his legacy as the greatest secure in boxing history. But those who knew about his friendship with Diana remember him for something else: his ability to see the champion in others, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. In the end, both champions, the boxer who couldn't control his shaking hands and the princess who held them steady, proved that the greatest victories happen outside the ring, in moments of genuine human connection, when one wounded soul recognizes the strength in another and calls it by name. Diana kept her promise to Ali. She never stopped fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And in doing so, she proved that sometimes the most meaningful titles aren't inherited or earned in competition. They're given by one champion to another in recognition of the battles that matter most. The champion of hearts fought until the end, just as she promised she would. If this incredible story of two legends finding strength in each other moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of seeing the champion in others. Have you ever had someone give you a title or recognition that changed how you saw yourself? Let us know in the comments below.